Thank you for coming out tonight. My name is Eric DeVito. I am the Director of Programs here for the Chesapeake chapter of COSI. This is our monthly dinner lecture. As we finish shuffling in, I wanted to introduce our speaker, Gundars Oswald. Over 40 years of practical system engineering experience, Gundars is currently working with Praxis as the Senior System Engineering Manager, and the work he's done here tonight is not just in this lecture, but also in the culmination of many months of many years of fascination with the Amelia Earhart case with his compatriot co-author on the paper, Mr. George Anderson. It was just so both happen to be also past board members of the Chesapeake chapter, and we're really excited to have them here tonight. Very fascinating material, and also a very creative method of using system engineering techniques and concept mapping to look at system engineering approach to finding Amelia. It's been also a great pleasure is to introduce my counterpart, Radu, over at the AIAA, which is our joint sponsor tonight for this event. And again, thank you all for coming out.
Thank you. George and I have been working in system engineering, as you said, over many years, and George has been working with NTSB. He was an Air Force pilot and NTSB investigator. So his interest in Amelia came from working with Tiger in the aircraft recovery area, where he had been out on aircraft recovery mission. He sort of got me pulled into this because I wanted to see how system engineering could be applied. And the more I worked on it, the more I got interested in just sort of the issues that came about, in the flight and how the flight was performed and how the mission was done. If you really want to know the details, this is just an introduction. Try to get you to read the paper, because the paper is pretty lengthy and we spent a long time on it. We spent about 2 months writing the paper and spent about a month writing the presentation, so we put a lot of effort into it, and we hope that somebody will take it to the next step. And please keep your questions to the end. I think some of you saw the previous slide where all our accomplishments. She actually only had a flying for about 16 years. She got her license at age 26. She bought a plane about 6 months later, and she tried to do all sorts of heroic flights across the United States. Part of it was to help sort of establish that women could do the same thing as men. She was big on that. The other thing that we wanted to do was to get women to actually be comfortable with airplanes and fly. That would help establish airlines and fly on airplanes. She's actually one of the first persons, picture right up there. She flew across, first woman to fly across the Atlantic after Lindbergh, 5 years later after Lindbergh. She flew across there. She got Presidential Medal of Honor and all sorts of awards for that, and not less unique what she had done. So what was her next goal? She wanted to do something different, and she wanted to do something that no person had done before, i.e., man or woman. She was always she was one of the first women to do everything that men could do, and I think it was something unique in 1930. She did say she wanted to fly around the world, and one of the things she told everybody was, I had the feeling that there's just about one more good flight left to me in my system. I hope this trip is it. She was 42 years old at the time, and she wanted to make a trip around there, make history, then come back, retire, teach, write books, do a presentation. Unfortunately, as we know, she didn't make it all although she did send her husband, Chris Putnam, who was very instrumental in helping her plan her trip, do the advertising, have a newspaper report on her progress, make money all sorts of ways. He did say, please know I'm quite aware of the hazard, he said in a letter to George, in case your flight was last. I want to do this. I don't want to do it because I want to do it. Women must try to do things that men have tried. When they fail, they tell you must put it to challenge to others. So she knew the risk, and the long flight, especially the last leg that she had, you see right there, 2,500 miles here, about 10 years, another year, a lot of flights over the ocean. She did achieve all these others in 28 days and 20,000 some miles around the world. But she didn't, where she didn't finish. Now, how this got started locally here within Tosi, about 18 months ago, we had Rick Gillespie come in. And I think you all guys know about Rick Gillespie. Lately, in the last month or two, he's been out searching for Amelia on the Gruesome Islands, where he thinks that landed and lived for a while and died. And he feels that the airplane slid off the side, and he's been looking for it. He spent $2 million since the last trip looking for it. Now, he's been there before. He found all sorts of artifacts. He found things like freckle cream that he could have used. He found other instruments, some navigational instruments and so on. The problem with that is we don't really have any quote-unquote DNA with it. We don't really know that they actually came from first flight. It could have been, there's a lot of, it's an island in the middle of nowhere. There's going to be all sorts of ships coming by, boats coming by. We know that also after she was lost, even George Putnam sent some people down there to look for her, and they could have, left these artifacts behind. Now, one artifact he found a picture where he said that there's a landing gear. He thought there was a landing gear, and there's a plane that landed there. The plane fell into the ocean, swept into the ocean. So that's what he was looking for right now. Unfortunately, he didn't find anything. Now, there is going to be and he's not going to give up for sure. He's been doing it for 23 years. There is actually, on August 19th, 7 o'clock, Discovery is going to have a show on, the Discovery tapes were part of this research, and they filmed it, and so they'll show the underwater searches and what they found, what they didn't find. As far as we know, they didn't find anything. So we took this is a challenge to system engineering. One of the problems was, including Rick and of course we've done a lot of research. There is very few people use any kind of structure in their thought process, like how they want to find it. They just put a bunch of facts out, and they take the facts that they like, and they use those. So what a lot of people don't know, but she actually had a navigator on it. Sexist as it might be, somebody had to help her pilot it, especially over those long waters. The navigator, Fred Noonan, came from Pan Am Airlines. He actually been flying over the Pacific for a couple times. He was actually chief navigator. He knew his business. He was very well respected, well qualified. But as we see something happen, and even to the best of people, something does happen that they can't quite reach the destination. And why are we going to try to find her? Well, because you guys are here. It's still a mystery. I know there's been a lot of TV reports from Rick in the last 2 months. Her 75th anniversary of being lost was a month ago. there's still a lot of people interested in determining what happened to her. One of the things we'd like to do is we'd like to recover the aircraft and find out what happened. We know that I just was out in Las Vegas and they had the Titanic exhibit there where they had taken a lot of artifacts from the Titanic. And there was actually newspapers, letters. You know, 13,000 feet, they actually were able to recover and read those. So we might be able to get artifacts from the plane that actually would help us figure out what their navigation process was. Can it be found? You know, we found the Titanic. I think it took them, like I said, 73 years to find it. Now the technology changed. They went back through old records of information and try to correlate those with computer programs. And they have better underwater search equipment. And so I think that, you know, the chances of finding it, the big problem we've got is the depth is about 20,000 feet. And they do have equipment to do that, and the searchers have been searching at 20,000 feet. But unfortunately, the area is so huge, as you'll see later on, that it's going to be difficult. So one of the things we did was we said, as we said, we're trying to bring our system engineering practices to play. I just studied for my CSEP, passed the test. George has passed the test. So we thought, well, we take a look at the book, take a look at the. Well, we might as well use our work that we did. And so, you know, this was a slide in there that you're all very familiar with. And we said, well, how could we apply it? Now, one of the things is we're actually doing reverse engineering because we're looking at, you know, what did they do and what information, how is that information used? So we actually use this to sort of help us normalize like what the activities they did. We actually created a chart, and some of these charts down here, you'll see, I'll talk about them later. We actually allocated the system engineering concepts to some of the diagrams that we have. So we were trying to, you know, one of the things, like I said, we ran into a lot of people just scattering facts out there, pulling the facts that they liked, putting it together in the scenario. I mean, Rick Gillespie's famous for that. For the last 23 years, he's had a vision that she's landed on that island and he won't go away from it. And, you know, they just spent $2 million looking, and he's not looking at any other, another scenario, which is fine. If he finds her, that's fine. But, you know, we think that there's a lot of other scenarios, especially when you're doing an airplane crash investigation. Normally, NTSB does 20 scenarios and throws out most of them and says, well, let's take the top 5 and let's investigate them further. So what we did was we took a little idea of putting together some processes. We said, well, the first thing we did a lot of research, and we'll talk about later about what we researched, but we spent months researching it. We had to evaluate the data and to see whether it's reasonable or not. Now, this is somewhat like a crash investigation where we've got the data. We got to figure out, well, where did it come from? Who said it? What was it? When did somebody write it down? Did it make sense with other data that was there? And that's, you know, credibility of the data. Then we created a concept map, and we'll talk about detail on why and how we did that. The concept maps are here, and we'll actually hand out at the end. I didn't want to hand them out at the beginning because I figured you guys would be reading them during the show. We're developing a scenario. Now, we've only developed one scenario. As we talk later on, we'd like to have more scenarios developed because there's probably other situations that could happen. We identified for the scenario the end of flight. we applied Bayesian theorems to talk about where we discovered those and how we use them. And then we created a search group based on the Bayesian theorem, based on the scenario. And if we're successful, we found her. If not, we go through again, just like a system engineering chart. One thing we decided that what they were doing was doing a mission. They were they're flying around the world. They had different stops. Now, all we cared is about the last leg because that's where she got lost. But they had to plan the mission. They had to figure out what the duties of the pilot, the pilot and the navigator were. They had all the other information that they had to get put together in terms of how much fuel they needed at which stop, what kind of repair equipment they needed. So we researched all that. We researched books. There's hundreds of books out there. I think I looked on the eBay and Amazon. There's like 1,500 books listed. And I know there's a lot of duplicates. There's probably a couple hundred books out there. We've pared it down to 20. There's also many, many books about her life. We were concentrating on the flight, and we were looking at all the details of her life, which is very interesting and very adventurous. Noticed a couple weeks ago, Google we celebrated her 150th birthday, and they put her plane that she used to fly across to from the far coast Atlantic on the Google webpage. We also found, the author of this book left a manuscript, and we found, and actually the manuscript was discovered after his death, and it was made into a book. And we actually found an actual manuscript at the NSA Cyber Museum. So what we're wondering is, how can we capture the data? We've got all this information. I had a lot of stuff in my head. George had a lot of stuff in his head. So we read one book, he read another book, and then we discussed things, and then we said, how can we ever remember what we captured here? How can we ever remember ourselves? And then, of course, how do we present it to someone else? So I had done work previously with concept maps and small concept maps. This turned out to be a large one. So what we have here is the different organizations that were on the mission. Program manager, the planner. You'll see the president, the first lady involved, the crew, the navigator, the pilot, and then the radio operator, which was the pilot, was also doing the duties of the radio operator. So we felt that it would help us capture the knowledge of experts. We have about 500 objects, 500 relationships, and like I said before, we're down here to look at, and we'll hand them out so you can look at them. Basically, you trace, and I'll have more detail. We'll show you how you can trace through those. So here's one here that we took each of the actors, so to speak, and we went and broke them apart so they could be seen. We have the relationships between them and the other actors. We have the system engineering processes here. And we can see that George Putnam was the project manager, and he pulled up the sponsors that produced, paid for the planes. He got book deals, he got newspaper deals. They put special covers on the plane where she signed them, and they made thousands of dollars on doing that. They actually got paid before the flight went off, so since it crashed, it's like a lottery ticket. So the government participated. She was introduced to Eleanor Roosevelt, and Eleanor was very interested in what she was doing. She actually took her for a flight around Washington, D.C., which was a little bit crazy, but she did do that. I think the president didn't know about it until afterwards. And she did promise her that she would teach her, give her flying lessons, but unfortunately, she disappeared before that happened. But one thing they did was they got the president to issue the State Department to tell the Interior Department to build a runway on Howard Island, which didn't have a runway. And he got the Navy to get the different ships out there to help with the direction finding. They got the approval from all the Department of Commerce to go and improve it all over the world. So, she got a lot of support. Of course, by that time, she was, a famous person, so to speak, because she had done, gone across the Atlantic. She had done a lot of other flights. The planning, George Putnam planned, was mostly in charge of planning, but there's people from the factory, there's people from the oil company that supplied the gasoline and oil, there was advisors, there was trainers, help trainers. Of course, Fred and Amelia also were working on doing the planning. So it was a lot of people involved in the planning. As we can see later on, there might have been some issues in implementing the plan. The planning probably was pretty good. Pre-flight days, they had to decide on what to take with them, how to go through the different flights, how to approach how to navigate through the flights. They had to look and see whether there's any airports that they could land at. They had to do some emergency procedures, and they had to decide what they want to take with them or not. They didn't take they didn't take the life jackets. They didn't take the lifeboats. They didn't take the parachutes. They wanted to, because they needed the weight for fuel. Now, not that we think that any of that could help them, because actually they've done a study on the crashing. They did like a simulation, like the crash into the ocean, and the plane, not only the plane didn't survive too well, the seatbelts in those days were not too good. So the seatbelt broke before and the pilot had only a slight chance of surviving the seatbelt breaking. So the odds are that all that stuff wouldn't have helped them anyway. Now, one of the things that on the previous flight, she's had a radio operator, but I guess she was trying to save weight and money too, because they were paying for this flight themselves. She's operated the radio. Now, the radio is there's transmitter, receiver, there's a direction finder radio. You can see all the different controls of the radio. She has a pilot control the radio, control the direction finder, which is a loop antenna that's mounted on top of the plane. You can see right here on the plane there's a little loop antenna. She's got to rotate it around and get the signal, and she's got to test the frequencies. And so there's a lot of stuff to do. The navigator also had a lot of duties. They had celestial navigation during the night. If there wasn't cloudy, he had to go through, just navigate. During the day, he could use the sun to help him figure out where they were. There was a lot of, and he had to keep track of where they were and where they're going, and had to tell. He couldn't tell Amelia directly. They had to pass notes back and forth because the cabin was so loud. The engines were so loud that they couldn't even talk to each other. So they had to pass notes. So one of the things it could be. And a couple of radio reports, they said they looked like they reported some positions incorrectly, where 2 digits were flipped. Well, it could have been that she misread the note or he miswrote the note. So there's a lot of technical issues. I mean, it's not like you're sitting in a 727. You're sitting in a very, very loud plane with fumes in there, gasoline fumes and everything around you, and it's very, very stressful. Plus, the flight lasted at least 20 hours, and she had a few hours. She might have been up 6 or 8 hours before that. So after 28 hours, you just have a lot of fatigue. Now the pilot, I know unfortunately it's too hard to read. Basically, this is your homework assignment. Follow through, saying that the pilot performs aircraft control, the pilot controls fuel tanks, the pilot controls engine, controls propellers, adjusts the magnetic compass, and direction gyro. So this is the aircraft controlled by the stereo pilot, and so on. So this is how you can read the chart and sort of walk through it and see what the relationships are. But you can see the pilot had a lot of things to do throughout the flight. Some of them, like adjusting the gyro and so on, where every half an hour or so she had to adjust because the equipment in those days wasn't as accurate and as good as it is today. Now the other thing is that they had fatigue, they had noise, they had lack of sleep, because Noonan maybe could have helped her hold the plane a little bit while she went to the bathroom, but that's about it. He's not really a pilot. He's a navigator, and he's got his duties. He's got to check the stars every half an hour or so to get a new position. So there was a lot of work that was being incurred. So one thing we wanted to do, like I said, a lot of people have talked about the radio transmissions and what the words were said and who said what and what were they written down? Were they written down correctly? Were their words erased? Could they even mean something else? We said, well, the heck with that. That's just really too much. What we want to do is we want to look at the basic things. Was she able to communicate? How did the radio propagation help us establish where her position is? What are the aircraft position reports? Now, she only gave 2 or 3 position reports, and they were only partial. So one of the things is, and especially toward the end of the flight, she had no position reports. She said, well, we're near you, we're 200 miles away. Well, that's not a position report. So that's one thing that makes it very, very difficult to figure out where she is. We certainly looked at fuel endurance and performance and tried to say, well, this is about 2,500 miles of how far could she have gotten on the fuel she had. And she did indicate toward the end of the flight that she was running low on fuel. We also looked at the previous deep sonar searches, which sort of happened inside the 50 miles. That's a 50 mile and it's a 300 mile. So the radio propagation went out 300 miles. The searches that were already performed, and we didn't find anything where it's in there. Now, one of the things that a lot of the searchers or the investigators are looking at, that the navigator was perfect, he didn't make any mistakes, and he didn't have any problems. Well, he might have not made any mistakes, but what if he couldn't, what if his clouds were covering up? What if he couldn't get the sighting of the stars? What if he miscalculated after 22 hours in the air, and not having too much sleep and being shaken around in the plane and the fumes of the gasoline smelling and, did he make a mistake? It's easily, it's human, can make mistakes. So I think too many of these people are looking at, there was no mistakes made and it was a perfect flight and somehow they just ran out of fuel. Well, as we know in accident investigations, there's always a couple things that happen that are completely unexpected. So what we were trying to do, what we did was, using this information, we sort of constrained the search around Howland Island. Now here's Nicarima where Rick was looking for her. It's still, within the margin of error, and we do have some scenarios that if the plane came over here and she could have flown down there. So we're not saying that she couldn't have got to Nicarima. What we're saying is that none of the artifacts that were found in Nicarima have any proof that it was any of her artifacts. So one of the ways to navigate is called deadening and George knows a lot more about it than I do. But basically, what you use time, distance, and predicting winds. Now, one of the problems they had was, as far as we know, they didn't bring any equipment. They brought the site to measure the winds, but they did bring their wind bombs or their drift bombs. The day drift bombs or the night drift bombs. And the night drift bombs had explosives in them, and so we think that they probably didn't bring those along because the plane was full of gasoline, and they're afraid that something could happen. And the day ones, we know that they left behind. We think they left behind Leia, but we're not sure that they had any on board, and that would cause problems on getting an accurate prediction on where they need to go. Now, the other problem is that dead reckoning errors, which are normal in this type of flight, they don't have a GPS at that time. They didn't have radio guidance. They had to sort of go for a while, check on the stars, then adjust this direction, check on the stars, adjust the direction. But you still could end up to be 10% off. Well, 10% off is 200 some miles. So, sorry, oops. So, normally dead reckoning errors require terminal guides, radio terminal guides. Without direction finders, even if she had a radio within 100 miles away or 200 miles away, she couldn't have seen the island. The island is 1.5 by half a mile. We've had some of the investigators go out there and did helicopter rides. And 15 miles out on a helicopter, they didn't see the island. They saw, the clouds were causing all sorts of shadows and so on. And they had to get within 4 or 5 miles of the island to see it. Now, the interesting thing is that the island position was off by 5 miles on the maps that they had those days. So, they had a lot of things going against them, so they needed a direction finder. And as we note, as we'll note here in a minute, they didn't have the direction finder. Now, we're looking at the radio station. This actually came out from George's good library. This came out of a 1938 book on propagation. So there's a donut which, when you see the propagation, the skywaves, most of the skywaves are here. So you get a signal strength of 5 if you're within 40, 50 miles of the area. If you're out in this area, you get 0, but then you go out a couple hundred miles, as the next diagram shows. So you've got an S5 here, and you've got an S5 here because of the skywaves. Now, they're not predictable, but certainly at certain times of the day, especially in the mornings or in the evening, in the morning time, they have calculated these, and they know that can happen. So one thing that happened was that the ship that was stationed here, that was listening to her, heard her signal in, 1 and a 2 and a 3, so that she could coming in here, hitting the donut, and flying down the donut this way, where they thought she was right here, and that's why they're looking like, well, she's either here or there, but she could have been out here, and they would have not known that. But the S5 signal is just a strength indication. You really don't. It's not a radar signal. So here's the example scenario. Basically, all flights, you go straight. You want to go straight to the island. What we think is that the Noonan had a navigation chart that he figured he would come down here and turn at a certain time. That the turning is based on his sighting of the stars. There's also a sun line here that he's using. Looking at the sun in the morning. Then he's using manuals to decide where he is based on the angle of the sun and the time of day. Now his chronometer could have been off. He could have been reading the wrong page of the book because there's the dateline. The dateline was out here somewhere, very very close by. So this was I can't remember what it was. One or two. You know, this could have been a date difference. He could have picked up the wrong page of the book, thinking he was still on the other date, and that could have caused him an error. So what we think is that he might, you know, our scenario, you know, let's say he made a couple mistakes, which are not unusual. So he turned early because of his clock was wrong. He hit the wrong sunline maybe because he read the wrong page of the book, and he's down here searching. You know, he's got a radio call saying that, okay, we're searching, we're running low on fuel. He could be here. He thought he was here. Now the interesting thing is, even if he was here, he still, you know, he might have been an accident, hit that on, but he wouldn't have seen it. He still needs his direction finder, and the direction finder was not working. We don't know why. We're not going to speculate, but for some reason it's not working. So they were doomed anyway. Even with the radio, her radio wasn't working either. She could transmit, but she couldn't receive. One thing we don't understand is about halfway through the flight, why didn't she turn around? Well, there's a reason why she didn't turn around. It's called get home-itis. Her husband wanted her home on July the 4th because they had a big parade in Oakland playing. All the newspapers, the movie studio, you know, the movie studios were there. They all wanted to see her, and so she had to get home. So she thought, I'm not going to turn around and be late for my homecoming. So there is a navigation error here that caused her to be off. But like I said, without a direction finder, they were still doomed for not being able to arrive where they're planning on. Now, one thing is, we knew that there was a lot of deep seas in the past. The Scorpion was mid-Atlantic. In fact, that was one of these searches where the submarine went down, and the last they heard of it was a couple days before. You know, so how do you find a submarine like that's gone for a couple days? And then we had the Air Force, some nuclear bombs were dropped, and a couple of them were lost. So we were trying to figure out, well, how did they do that? Air France 447 was looked, and they looked, and finally they found the transponder. They found some gold in Central America, on the Central America ship, and the Thresher. Well, it turns out what they used was somebody called Beige, and they wrote these theorems in 300 years ago. And they were using those theorems in here was actually a grid where they're figuring out with the highest probability. This was used by the searchers for their grants. So we created a grid. We took a scenario, created a grid, calculated the Bayesian probabilities based on facts that we had, that we used on the. We projected the end of flight. So what we would do normally is you would search this grid, and if you didn't find her, you would recalculate the probabilities, and then maybe this one happened to be the next highest grid, and this is lower, and then maybe you search down this way. So that way you didn't have to search every grid. Now this is about 30 by 40 miles, so there's a lot of, and the equipment has to go about every 2,000 feet, going back and forth to find her, so to find the object. So we looked at our scenario. This is a sample scenario. Like we said, there is a lot more. And we know everybody wants to know, well, where do you think she is? Well, based on the navigation errors, based on the signal, you know, the fact that they searched here, the fact that the radio signal was reached out this way, we took a shot and said, well, maybe she's over here. we'll search around this area, and if not, maybe we'll search a little bit further down. It's 100,000 square miles just to search this grid. It would take, if you had to search every bit of it, it would take about 15 years. Now, in order to search the highest probability, we think it's going to take about 3 years. Now, if you use some of the newer equipment and, so it could take less, but, if you found it earlier, that'd be good, but it's a large project. And what they've done in the past, they've searched like half of this, and they've taken like 3 months, and they've searched another half, take another 3 months, spent $5 or $10 million. So we're trying to narrow the search area using the Bayesian probabilities, which would reduce the time it would take. So there's some advances in technology that may help. One of the interesting things we found, we don't know how real this is, but you have a photocell on a submersible. The idea would be is charge it up, get the GPS coordinates from the satellite, you go down and you search around, battery runs out, you come back and do it again. What if you had 100 of them there? They could all search autonomously. I know the Navy's looking at doing robotics to support their submarines to go out and just do missions around their submarines to make sure that there's not any other submarines in the area. They can do this much quieter than the submarine they have. So we think that this could reduce the factor by factor of search, how fast it gets searched by factor of 5. Hopefully that's, and then maybe you can do something like this, add a lot of them, and you might be able to get a reasonable time frame. The problem is that, a lot of these other searches that we saw, except for the Thrasher, were limited within 50, well, like the 447 was 40 miles. They knew it was within 40 miles. And they took them months and months and months to find her. We're looking at thousands of miles, at the worst case, because she didn't give any position reports. And the only thing we've got is signals from the radio. Like I said, there's no complete position reports ever. I mean, the reports are all not done as the pilot that today would, and probably not done as the pilot that then would. She was a little bit of a happy person, just doing her thing and flying across the country and not paying attention to too many rules. And that was one of the rules she didn't do. The pilot and navigator were lost. Yeah, obviously they were lost, but one thing about lost is they said, we're 200 miles out and we can't see you, or we're 100 miles out, we can't see you. Well, they thought they were at the island, but they couldn't see her, couldn't see the island, so they were lost. Now, if they're lost, there's all sorts of schemes. Well, they were lost, but they flew over to some other island, and they're living there happily ever after. Well, if they're lost, how could they fly it anywhere? It's crazy. There's a lot of crazy stories out there. They could have increased their distance from the island during the search. Instead of, like the map we showed, instead of searching toward the island, they could have gone away from the island. And the crew was confident. You saw she had a lot of experience in flying. The navigator was very experienced with the airlines. They were both very experienced, and they probably took risks that they shouldn't have, because they were not used to flying such long stretches of water without much support. And there was really no alternate landing fields at that time down there in that area. And like I said before, they crossed 20 time zones in 28 days, flew 20,000 miles. So there's a lot of stress, all the food they're eating. I know that they got sick from time to time from the local food and water. And the cabin environment was pretty hellacious with noise from the helicopters. They even, from the blades, they said the blades, if you didn't get both engines going exactly the same speed, they were sort of waterboarded, chopper even making this chopping noise, and so it was driving everybody crazy to do that. And you had to adjust it, and you couldn't really adjust them that well. So this is 75 years ago. The equipment wasn't as sophisticated as today. Like we said, we thought that they had a 20-hour flight. We knew we had, or last reported about 20 hours. But Amelia used to get up at 3 in the morning. I think they did a check flight that morning. They checked their radios. They made sure that all the fuel was topped off. So they had a lot of work to do before the flights took off. The maximum search distance was based on the propagation for the radio signals, at least in our case, what we determined. Minimum was in the search area. And like I said, most of the previous searchers said, well, she had to be within 50 miles an hour because the navigator was perfect and the navigation was perfect and everybody was perfect and just something happened. Well, the fact is, a lot of things could happen, and they could have been hundreds of miles away. And so if you take that premise, you got a huge search area. As we said before, the concept map should help capture knowledge, and we really do think we need multiple scenarios. We're looking at this more from a system engineering approach. We're not looking at trying to solve a problem, although it'd be convenient if we did solve it the first time. But George says we would be famous. So our recommendations are, one, we'd like to see that the U.S. government somehow claim ownership of that plane. What happened with the Titanic was a disaster. There were all sorts of people fighting over the ownership. People went down there and robbed the artifacts. And I know there's a company that right now is has a permission to do that. But it's certainly something we don't want happening to the Amelia's airplane. We'd like to see it recovered. We'd like to see a reward offered. Now, unfortunately, I think the reward's not going to really help much unless it's hundreds of millions of dollars, because Rick spent $2 million just searching for 10 days, but you can see to search for a year would cost tens and tens of millions of dollars. So I think it's the thrill of finding it is going to be the main thing, not the reward. I don't think anybody can be rewarded. We thought maybe we have the Navy always tests their equipment over and over again. So maybe we thought maybe we would set that up to be a national test range so that they could justify to go down there and test out their equipment. And while they're doing that, they could help search the areas. One thing we do think seriously that we need to get some people in the international pilots and navigators and searchers, undersea water searchers, get them together in a room and see if they can come up with some more scenarios that could be useful in trying to determine maybe alternate approaches to where she might be. And I think the long-term deep sea plan would be based on those scenarios. So the homework assignment is we have Limbo 17s, and we have on our website we have a 108-page document. So anything you learn out of it, we'd appreciate to get some feedback. Our website is on the CMAP there, so you can take a video, look it up on the website, and get copies of this and get copies of the document.